Data curation and storage. What do we mean with data curation? Obviously, just like any pictures that you could look at, in this case here, the display of the University of Mannheim campus. Pretty nice old castle. With some editing, we can change colors. With some more editing, we turn the whole thing into data. Editing happens everywhere. And the same is, of course, true with the data that we'll deal with. There might be editing as part of this curation step in the big data process. You wouldn't want all information that comes through to the host. You would take out, certain elements. Maybe you would restrict to certain types of postings. Maybe you would restrict it to certain type of geocodes, although that is more a filtering step. But in any case, most likely there is editing going on or data curation. But that's not the only post-processing step that you see in it happening after the actual data is collected. Often you have a step of de-identification, making sure that personal identifiable information is not longer part of the dataset. There's additional data entry going on. Maybe you had open answers or just, recordings that need to be keyed into so that they become, data points, numeric values. There might be some coding, as I said, of open answers that can be automated. Maybe you use some machine learning techniques to do that. You could check for errors, the inconsistencies in answers, inconsistency in how the data come in, timing, a purchase can't be made before a selection. The transportation of the data to you might have been screwed up depending on what you do here. And often you have to construct a new data set entirely because the data that come in are at different levels. You might have something about the household, the individual people in each household, and those need to be pieced together. There is this front set, including code post construction and variable generation, to which I say a few more words, heavily covered in other courses on Coursera. We'll talk a little bit about these, but our focus is actually somewhere else. So let me briefly touch here on the variables. There are two types of variables that we differentiate in, continuous and categorical variables. An example for continuous variables are blood pressure. Pretty much, values possible in any range. They can be on an interval and ratio scale. Ratio scale usually reserved for variables that have, a defined zero value. That's not true for all interval scale variables. And then there are categorical variables that are either ordinal or nominal, that have ordered or nominal, that have different categories that you can order, or different categories that are just distinct from each other. This question that you see here has a categorical nominal answer category, which is just yes and no. There's no ranking within the yes and no questions. Now, a little bit on that to actually how to actually construct a good question, you'll learn in questionnaire design. But one issue that comes up in this coding, and we'll talk about that some more in questionnaire design, but if you deal with data in any form of setting, you have to make sure that when this gets turned into variables, or as you will see the computer scientists talk about, into features, you often have multiple categories. And when you use them, you, for each of these categories, have to make sure that you say, okay, does apply and does not apply, right? So you end up having a lot of different variables, for example, public, yes, no, private, yes, no, and the like. So even so that looked like one question before, later on in your data set, it will be 7 different variables or features generated out of this one question. Now our focus later on in the specialization is on building weights and imputing missing data. So if you don't have certain information, what to do then. Because the step in between, we found that a lot of people actually do learn this eventually. Or as I said, there are other courses luckily available here where you learn these pieces. We go a step further and want to make sure that you have a good grip on your entire data set, so that you can do proper data analysis.